Hi, this is John Falk. For this video, I'm going to provide a high-level overview of Micro Focus ALM Octane. It's actually quite interesting. Octane, it's becoming harder and harder to deliver a short, high-level video overview. Over the last 18 to 24 months, the capabilities of the product have expanded vastly. ALM Octane itself is developed with an enterprise agile methodology with monthly releases from a SaaS perspective and a quarterly release from an on-premises perspective. So the capabilities, again, continue to expand at a rapid pace. But I'll do my best to provide a kind of high-level overview of what the primary capabilities with ALM Octane are. The Octane environment itself within an instance has a lot of capabilities. For example, we support multiple workspaces within ALM Octane. So these workspaces can be set up as shared or isolated workspaces depending on how the customer wants to utilize the workspaces, what level of security they need, what type of reporting they need. So even flexibility at a workspace level of how that the workspaces are used here. I'm going to be using an example of Advantage Online Shopping, which is a standard traditional agile development activity, and then a safe 4.x, 4.5 environment to show how we overlap onto the SAFe framework. Those are just the two I'm doing. We could also use other scaled agile frameworks or other enterprise agile frameworks like Spotify, Less, or DAD, but SAFe is one of the most common ones that a lot of people know. You'll see some core modules of Octane like requirements and backlogs, quality, and pipelines. These are flexibility in their use, so the organization deploying Octane can decide what modules they want to use and how they want to utilize those modules. For example, the requirements module supports multiple business cases, so I can use it to define how I want to manage my development effort, kind of my definitions of best of how I'm going to write code, development standards, business practice, for example, or I can use it to manage a pure waterfall project with traditional requirements. In my case, I'm going to look at it as a mechanism of business definitions that I'm using to feed my enterprise agile projects. So I'm going to go into author mode here, and I'm working on this project, Advantage Online Shopping. Now I could have tied into another portfolio management tool like Micro Focus PPM, where I could be defining all those business initiatives and publishing high-level epics and business definitions from PPM into Octane. But in this case, I'm assuming I don't have a tool like PPM, and I'm just managing an end-to-end solution within Octane. So here, I can create all of my business definitions, why I'm delivering this website, right? Why I'm delivering this application. So when I think of the requirements module, for me, it's kind of the why in my business definitions. So I kind of understand this history of online shopping, what the growth potential is, some statistics to back it up, what type of customers I'm trying to attract, what I need to consider from a design perspective, or what advantages do I have with an online shopping store versus a brick and mortar store, for example. And it becomes very collaborative, right? I can interact with my other teammates. I can add comments here. I can call out to teammates. So again, it's not enough for these environments just to be isolated, but I need collaborative platforms that I can work with the entire team and across multiple teams to make sure that we're delivering what the business requires and that we're doing it on time. So this is how I'm managing the requirements backlog. I can use the requirements business definitions to drive my traditional backlog. But again, I kind of consider the requirements area of why I'm undergoing this development effort and the justification for that development effort. Then, and you'll see this kind of very left to right flow as I move through Octane. So it keeps things very simple as I move from module to module. So I'm going to, from why I'm developing this effort to the actual planning of this effort, or the what. What am I going to deliver? And so I'll start in, for example, the epics view of the backlog. So here I have a backlog tree. I can see all of my high-level epics, initiatives or themes, depending on what terminology you want to use. We call them epics natively. Those epics can then be deconstructed into features, and then features deconstructed into backlog items like user stories and or defects. And then user stories can be further broken down into tasks. So I can do task level management at the team level. Kind of as a best practice, epics tend to be large initiatives that span multiple releases. I'm going to continue always to be working on billing, for example. That's something that's going to be going across multiple releases. As I deconstruct billing down into features like being able to support credit card purchasing, that's a feature that I want to deliver as a functional part of my next release. I need that feature deployed. And then as I break it down further into user stories and or defects, those are smaller work items that are delivered within the confines of a release. So here I am doing all my backlog management, grooming my backlog, doing all the planning, defining my epics. I can go down further, define all the features, and then I can go down even further and deconstruct those features into backlog items, user stories, and defects. We make it very easy from a user interface to view this information. For example, if I want to see what tasks are assigned to a user story, we have a lot of quick views, so I can just drill down and I can look at the tasks of analyze, implement, and test for this user story. I can see the status. This is called the Smart View mode. I can look at it in a traditional grid mode where I can select my own columns and see information specific that I need for managing my application. And then you'll see this throughout Octane, the concept of quality. Quality is everywhere. Tests are pervasive throughout the system. So we have test assets linked to user stories, to defects, and to features to make sure all the work we're delivering is being delivered with a high level of quality. So I can support out-of-the-box BDD-style testing like Gherkin tests or standard manual tests. Those tests are directly linked with the assets they need to validate. Again, we always have the quick view look where I can look at the steps of my BDD test, for example. So I can see kind of the standard feature file and scenario outline, the parameterization. For manual tests, I can go see the manual test steps that I need executed. I can always go into the details of any one of these tests and look at the actual test, modify them, manage the steps of this test. I can manage the test runs as these are executed. The results of those runs are automatically linked back to the user stories, defects, and or features. And all of these tests can be integrated to a common IDE, if you will, that we have plugins for like IntelliJ, Eclipse, Visual Studios, so you can automate those tests. The goal in Agile is to automate as much as possible. It's pretty impossible in most cases to automate 100% of everything. I like kind of that 80-20 rule, 70-30 rule. If you can get 70-80% of your tests automated, you're becoming really successful. Some things like exploratory testing and other tests you still probably need to do from a manual perspective, but we support automated and manual tests in this environment, seamlessly integrated with the backlog, no additional plugins needed, no other tools needed. We also connect to heritage Micro Focus tools like Unified Functional Test and LeanFT, if you will, so we can use those automated tools and bring the results of those tests into Octane as well. So we make it very simple from an integration perspective. So that's all managed in the grid, fairly easy from a UI perspective. All the releases are in the planning buckets on the right-hand side of the screen, so I can look at a release, Advanced Online Shopping 1.0. I can look at upcoming releases. I can take and plan work to an individual release, or I can do my sprint planning and plan that work directly to a sprint and a team. This is something that the overall release team would do is their release planning, kind of manage their backlog, and then when we do sprint planning, they do it right here in the single interface, right? They would select what release they want to, or what sprint they want to assign work to, and then the teams would pull from the backlog for the work that they're committing to. Little indicators to see if we're overplanned, are we exceeding the velocity of the team? Maybe we're doing that intentionally because we want to do some stretch goals, or maybe we have some other teams that have some additional velocity available, so we can rescope some work from one team to another team to make sure that they're all delivering on what's needed. Preview pane, so if we don't want to drill into the details on a story, we can always go to a preview pane and see what the phase or status of this story is. We can actually move it from phase to phase if necessary, depending on what our workflow is. And tags are just an easy way to filter the backlog, so you don't have to write complex filters. If I only want to look at defects, I can just select the tag defect and I see only the defects, or I can unselect it and see all the backlog items. I can also create custom tags to manage again and sort the information specific to how I want to view it as a developer, as a product manager, as a scrum master, if you will. We also do some the ability to drill out on specific releases. So if I want to look at just this one release specifically, and I want to see the timeline for this release, I can see all my sprint cycles. I can see if I have any milestones that are critical for my development activity. For example, here in the middle of Sprint 4, I have an executive demo I have to deliver. Milestones are important because things don't always end conveniently right at the end of the sprint or right at the end of the release. You might have to do, for example, an executive demo or have a trade show, or you may have some specific business obligation, like if you're working on the Affordable Care Act and you have to have some activity done by June 1st of a particular year. You would set that as a milestone to make sure that your development effort is in line with what the business needs to deliver, even if it is within the confines of a release or even within a sprint. So we provide a lot of easy visibility into that type of information. And again, I won't be able to get into all the details on what these capabilities are, but it's just within Octane very simple to get to the information that's important to a developer or to a product management person or a project management person. So if the requirements are all about why are we doing this, and the backlog is kind of defining the what, the effort that we're going to deliver to the business, the team backlog is all about that execution or that delivery. So this is where we'll see our storyboards, our Kanban boards. We can turn on where we can view attachments and kind of give it that look of easy Kanban navigation, drag and drop. I can see my teams if there's any critical defects. So this is where I manage all the work from a user story perspective. The swim lanes are customizable. I can set WIP limits or time limits. If I'm running in a pure Kanban environment, I can change the card size if I want to view more or less data on the cards, depending on how I want to manage my real estate. A lot of flexibility in the user interface. Sometimes boards, they can take up a lot of space, so we can turn it into grid mode if we want to manage it that way and we think we get better real estate, or I like looking at things in more of a grid view. I can select between grid and board and multiple views. I can do sorts here. I can do group bys here, so I can manage that information very easily. And then at the end of the sprint, we have a nice retrospective and close. So we have some scope change reports, what work was planned, was there any unplanned work that was delivered that was added mid-sprint, did we have to de-scope some work? So maybe if we added some work, we had to de-scope some work, so we track that. Just some notes about what went well, what do we need to improve on. And then if there is any incomplete items that we need to maybe rescope to a new sprint or just move them to the backlog so that work can get accounted for. Because unfortunately, in reality, not always do all the user stories and or defects get finished at the end of the sprint, so we have to account for that and manage that work as well. So the team backlog is really about executing on the work that we defined and we committed to from the planning phase of the backlog. Again, kind of just continuing to move left and right from requirements to backlog management to team management. We have the quality module. The quality module is really focused on that ongoing product quality. Once we've delivered that work, we've committed source code, we've completed tests and run them, are we running still with a high level of quality? So all those tests that we defined in the backlog or tests that we brought in externally, they could have been UFT tests, they could have been Lean FT tests, they could have been Selenium tests. As a matter of fact, I can just look at automated tests if those are what's important to me. So these are tests that are coming in from like a CI server like Jenkins or TeamCity or Bamboo. So I can integrate automated tests and manual tests so I have that view of my overall quality of my application. And here you'll see another tree, very similar to the backlog tree, but these are the actual components of my production application. So as I'm delivering features out that are functional, tangible pieces of my production code, I can link that back to my quality module, link test assets to it, regression tests, end-to-end tests, so I can make sure that future deployments don't impact functioning work that's already done in my production application. So the quality module is something that's very unique to Octane that keeps that ongoing product visibility of not only did we do unit testing to make sure the code we're deploying is good, but we didn't break something that's already in production. Their application is still functioning the way it should. Here in the quality module, we can also integrate performance test information. So if we're running like storm runner load, we can bring in the results of performance tests to make sure not only do we have functionally the application is doing what it should be, but it's running under load appropriately. Or we bring in fortified security testing, can also come into the quality module. So if we're doing security scans and we're making sure that our code is secure, if that's critical to our business, that all comes into the quality module. So as we move, continuing that left to right flow, that quality is really focused on ongoing product quality. In the pipeline module, this is where we're really connecting into those external DevOps environments. So in this case, I'm connected into a Jenkins environment. I can see the results of a Jenkins job. It could be a source code build. It could be a lot of tests that are being run. And I can see if that build failed. And again, we do more than just provide information. These are all actionable metrics. So if I look and I see I had a lot of failures on regression testing, or components of my quality module are broken, and here are the developers that committed code that had failed tests, I can go into the failure analytics screen, and I can look at not only did it fail, but why did it fail and who caused it to fail. So if I go select an individual run, I can actually see the stack trace that was reported back from Jenkins as to why this job failed. I can also look at who committed code to the build. And so maybe I had 20 developers that committed code. And let's say Jason says, hey, I'm looking at this user story, I'm looking at that stack trace, and that was my code that caused the build to fail. So he can select, for example, I'm on it. So it sends a notification to the other 19 developers that Jason has acknowledged that his code failed the build. He's going to work on it and resolve it, recommit the source code, and hopefully the build is going to be a clean build or a green build and be successful. And it keeps the other developers from having to waste a lot of time to research if it's not something that's their issue. And we always maintain that linkage back to development activity, back to user stories, so we can always see the stories that are part of a build, and then actually what source code repository that those stories were committed to. So we maintain that traceability. So here I can see this commit, and I can actually see the file repositories in source code management where this commit was done. So a lot of work into failure analytics of why it failed, and then we can start becoming more predictive. We can start logging failures as to what caused the failure. That way, if the same thing is repeated in the future, we can start predicting what the cause of a future build failure was based on historical information. So that's something that just helps teams become more successful in having successful builds and also researching builds that had failures associated with them. So the pipeline module is really the key to bringing in all of that external DevOps style environments to us, and it's kind of out-of-the-box integrations with, I said, like Jenkins, TeamCity, Bamboo, source code management, really anything that's connected to a organization's CI server. We can publish that information back into Octane and use it to make the overall application development effort more stable and better. So that's the pipeline module. A couple other little things I want to touch on. You'll see these overview modules within each main section. These graphs, charts, and analytics really provide great information about this specific module. They're all context sensitive, so as I drill down through the backlog, these charts and graphs will automatically update based on what I have selected from the backlog tree, for example. So these are very specific to the backlog module in this case. But if I want to see overall information about the entire workspace, I can click on the primary dashboard. This gives me a more holistic view of everything across the entire environment. I can customize this. I can export this data via OData feeds if I'm using Power BI or Tableau or some other type of reporting tool, even Excel. It's very easy to consume the reports within Octane. It's very easy to consume these reports externally to other tools. And again, just like you saw in the pipeline module, these dashboards are becoming not only informational, but actionable. So if I can look at the components of my production application, this is tied over to that quality module that we just looked at, I can see I have some database performance issues, for example. And if I click on the heat map, I can see that more than 45% of the last runs failed, actually 67% of them failed, and I can then drill into the actual failed runs and see why are these manual tests failing, or why is that Gherkin test failing. And then I can drill into the individual runs, and I can start saying, hey, it worked once, I had a couple blockers on there, most recently it failed. I can start fixing the problem so I can bring quality back to my application. These are all real-time updated, so as these runs are executed, this heat map is dynamically going to update in real time, so we maintain that high level of visibility. So a lot of flexibility and functionality within the dashboard, and this is where you would have a lot of burn up charts, burn down charts, all those common charts, but always with a focus on quality as well, which is something that's very unique to ALM Octane. Again, no other additional plugins or tools needed to do that. A specific module centered around defects, so we can manage just defects specifically. Here we go on the defect side of things, so I can look at all the defects for my application. Just so if I'm really focused on defect management, I can do that there. And then my work. So a lot of times what we've noticed is developers, they don't care about other people's work. They only care about their work. So we've created a My Work quick link. And as a developer, I'm only going to see the work that's assigned to me. I'm going to see my tasks. I'm going to see my user stories. I'm going to see my tests, so I can manage my work specifically. And anything that's assigned to my work, and I'm going to switch over to my IDE IntelliJ here, for example, I can see all of my backlog items that are assigned to me. If I have a user story I want to start working on, I can select Start Work. It's automatically going to tag this user story to my source code that I'm working on. If I'm working on tests, I might be an automation engineer. I can take it like a Gherkin-style BDD test. I can download that script out of Octane, and I can manage that BDD script right here in my IDE. So as a developer, I can stay working in my IDE. I don't have to keep going back to Octane to interact with the development environment. I can bring that development environment to my IDE for the plugin. Out of the box, we support, like I said, IntelliJ, Eclipse, and Visual Studios. So a lot of flexibility in helping the developers manage their work. And I think that's all I have time for. I will do another video where I get into our safe support and I show how we structure Octane to support safe. But that provides a high-level overview of all of the core capabilities of Octane. Thank you.